Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we've got a very special one indeed. I expect both of these beers are just going to blow my mind. This is the last two beers I had from my third Tavour shipment that I've gotten thus far. I decided to save the two that I was coveting the most for last. So today we are jumping into some big ABV Imperial Stouts here. Starting with North Coast Brewing, a few episodes back we reviewed Old Rasputin, fantastic Russian Imperial Stout. This is a special version that they brew. This is a barrel-aged Old Rasputin that has been aged in rye whiskey barrels. Clocks in at 11.2% ABV. They are based out of Fort Bragg, California. Number two, I expect will be equally special. This is by Fathers Brewing Company. It's called Wheelhouse. This is their 2018 release. This is an Imperial Stout, coffee Imperial Stout that has been whiskey barrel aged, and it is 10% ABV. They're based out of Valparaiso, Indiana. Now, this specific beer was aged for 4 months in Journeyman, Not a King barrels, which are the base that George Washington used for his personal whiskey recipe. So this beer is indeed inspired and aged in the barrels that inspired George Washington's personal recipe, which I just think is awesome in and of itself, and I can't wait to jump in to both of these. So we're going to do just that, getting started with the North Coast Brewing barrel-aged Old Rasputin, clocking in at 11.2%. Okay, so jumping straight into the first beer of today's Imperial Stout review, we've got the North Coast Brewing's Barrel-Aged Old Rasputin 21. That's XXI, Roman numerals on this. Rye whiskey barrel-aged, 11.2% ABV. I did the standard Old Rasputin, several episodes ago, maybe 3 to 5. And it's an absolutely fantastic beer. I've had that one many times, but it had been several years since I last had it. Want to jump in with a critical eye, and it still blows me away. I'm expecting this to take that base recipe and just kick it up a notch with the rye whiskey barrel aging. So the label still has the small little Rasputin throwing up the sign on his forehead. Other than that, it's rather understated. Let's get this poured straight in the glass. Okay, very dark as it is. Not as thick coming out of the bottle as you would perhaps anticipate at this ABV as an Imperial Stout, Russian Imperial Stout. And that is a ridiculously creamy head. I mean, just a ridiculously creamy head. This could have been poured off of a nitro tap. It is that thick and lush. Pitch black for the appearance, as is expected. Quite effervescent as I was pouring it, which obviously helps to contribute to this very lush head. I'm going to start breaking it down just a little bit here with my finger because I let it get a little out of hand, and I want to be able to jump in here sooner than later. But that'll break some of it down. Going to give it a sniff. Okay. It smells like the classic Old Rasputin, just like their standard. You could smell deep, richly roasted malts in there. I mean, very deeply roasted. That is just jumping straight out of the glass. But riding on top of it is this booziness that this beer actually, in its standard form, also has as well. But it's that whiskey barrel that really comes through. So it's layered with just rich malts, booze, and then whiskey. So 3 kind of separate flavor profiles, and they're all pretty much equal. It's very well balanced in the aroma. I'm going to break this down just a little bit more because I want to be able to try to top this off just a tick before I jump right in. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm going to try to break this down just one last time. It's still just a bit high for my liking. Not out of place. It just makes a mess in my beard. I'm sorry. Hazards of beard growth. Okay, that's pretty good there. Looks great, smells great. We're going to jump right in. Mm. 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 Oh. Oh, wow. Oh, that's big. Big and boozy. Big and boozy. Oh, man. Okay. This is an even bigger beer, having been aged in whiskey barrels. The Standard is one of the biggest Russian Imperial Stouts I could think of. It is the number one. Hey, what's a good Russian Imperial Stout you could recommend? It's the one I would recommend above all others, and I've had many. It's the one I would recommend first. This takes that already incredible beer and just adds a whole nother dimension to it. That boozy quality that you get in the aroma that only comes through a little bit on the flavor in the Standard really comes through in here, and it just pairs with that intense whiskey back. And you get some of the woody character from the barrels that comes through in the beer as well. And I'll tell you, it's so strongly whiskey forward that the malts are kind of playing secondary on the flavor profile. They come through. You get that roasty nature in the back, but really the main emphasis on this is this whiskey barrel aging and how it changes the beer, and it changes it significantly. It's essentially like drinking a completely different beer here. I'm going to jump back in for body mouthfeel finish. The body is medium heavy. It's not as big and bold as you would expect for a beer that's 11.2%. The mouthfeel is quite viscous. It's got some stickiness to it, and it definitely sticks all around the palate. The finish, really, after all those flavors I already described to blend together, once it apexes, it's a very even balance of very deep, richly roasted malt, whiskey, and a secondary boozy nature that really starts to kind of blend with the whiskey, though they're not completely the same in the way that they bring themselves out in the beer. It's almost like a separate category. There's whiskey barrel, and there's like a boozy quality and the malts. And the oaky kind of character, I don't know if it's oak barrels that they aged them in. I assume it probably is, but the barrel definitely adds this woody quality that pairs with the roastiness of the malts that starts to come through on the second half, like the peak up to the finish, and then the second half as it tapers, and it's very long. The Standard beer is a pretty long finish. This is even longer. This whiskey just really lingers around the mouth, as does the barrel, as does that slightly boozy edge, and it helps kind of extend the length of how long these roasted malts stay with you. This is an incredible beer. It's absolutely incredible. I love the Standard Old Rasputin. I'm not even going to say one's better than the other because they're completely different, but this is equally as incredible. Absolutely equally as incredible. This is a very special beer indeed. Folks, I'm going to take my time, sip on this slowly. It's a big beer. It's a lot to take in. I'm going to come up with my scores. When we come back, we're going to get to the Fathers Brewing Wheelhouse 2018 release, the Coffee Imperial Stout that's been whiskey barrel aged at 10% ABV. Okay, now we are moving on to the second beer of today's Imperial Stout review. This is the Fathers Brewing Company's 2018 release, Wheelhouse. This is a Coffee Imperial Stout that's been whiskey barrel aged. It's 10% ABV. They're out of Valparaiso, Indiana. Specifically, it's been aged for 4 months in Journeyman Not a King barrels, which it was inspired by George Washington's actual rye whiskey recipe. And yeah, I honestly can't wait. I'm very interested to see how this beer is. I imagine it's going to be great. So you know, label art, there's kind of a ship's wheel on there. It's rather understated, but let's get this poured. That's got a nice thickness to it. Looks quite a bit thicker than the old Rasputin was. All right, and it formed a nice creamy head there. It's impossible to tell via the camera, I'm sure I can tell you that, but there is actually a fair bit of effervescence. I can see it just shooting up the sides. It's very tight, fine bubbles predominantly, with some medium ones interspersed. Appearance-wise, this is a textbook Imperial. It is absolutely pitch black, so exactly as expected. And indeed, yeah, that head did form. Really quite creamy. I can see it's predominantly really small effervescence that's coming up in here, and just a mix of some medium carbonation. I can see the head already settling a little bit, but let's give it a sniff. Ooh, ooh, that smells quite nice. It's got a rather pungent aroma. The coffee comes through very, very strongly. You can also really pick up the malt backbone, and that barrel aging really comes through as well. It's really much like the old Rasputin. It's in equal parts. You get malt, and in this instance, coffee is the next layer, and the whiskey. Now, this doesn't smell boozy like the old Rasputin did. It maybe without the coffee would have a boozy edge, but even with a whiskey barrel, it doesn't smell like a boozy beer. It smells really good, and it smells like it's going to be well balanced. So I'm going to jump right in. That head settled down. Let's see what this is about. Oh, man. Oh, that's a big decadent beer. Oh, boy. Oh, it gets better the longer the finish goes. It just keeps getting better and better. Oh, man. Wow. This is really, really good. Oh, both of these beers are winners. This is really, really good. I drink a lot of Imperial Stouts, and I drink a lot of barrel-aged beers and barrel-aged Imperial Stouts, but honestly, this is one of the best I've had in a while. This is a really, really fine beer. Okay. Up front, you get the coffee. It hits you in abundance. It's got a big, bold coffee bite. And then the malts come into the background, and they start pairing with the coffee. And then it opens up into this burst of that whiskey barrel, and the whiskey starts to pair with the malt and the coffee, and the flavor just gets more intense and more intense and more intense. And it really becomes just a perfect pairing. Like all three flavors are melding together as they build in intensity. Once it hits the apex, it slowly starts its descent in the flavor, but the flavors never really break apart until the very end of the finish. The whiskey barrel is kind of the little lingering background note at the very end of the finish, and the coffee mixed with the malts are kind of the dominant effect that's in here. It's really nice. It's got a very long finish. I'm going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel here. The body is medium. At a 10%, you might expect it to be bigger than it actually is, but it's a medium body. I wouldn't even say it's medium heavy, it's medium. The mouthfeel, as thick as this looked pouring in, it's got some viscosity, but not overt. It's there, but not bonkers. So it's got this nice, smooth, creamy mouthfeel about it that goes with this light viscosity. And the dominant effervescence that came through in here is these fine bubbles. Indeed, that's probably why this head is still formed here, sitting on top, even though I've broken into it a few times. It's just a beautiful creamy pad. It could have been poured off of a tap. It's that fine and creamy. And it adds to that creamy texture. And you couple that with the viscosity that it does have, and it really lets the flavors stick all around the palate. It's a fantastic beer. And this is exceptionally, exceptionally well balanced. All of the parts that went into making this what it is get their own voice. None of them override one or the other. They're all playing equal parts into making this beer, and it is absolutely fantastic. I love this beer. I really, really do. I gotta jump in one more sip, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Final thoughts here. I should have mentioned, up front, first gets in your mouth, it starts with this slight sweetness and just the hint of booziness you can taste before it opens up into the coffee and the malts and the whiskey barrel. The whiskey barrel, in tandem with imparting that really bold whiskey flavor that pairs so beautifully with the base beer and the coffee, does impart a slight hint of vanilla, just a slight hint on the back. And it pairs very well with the other flavors in this beer. I don't think I really missed anything else. I gotta say, this is exceptional. They both are, and this one is equally as good. I absolutely love it. I do highly recommend both of these. I'm gonna take my time, finish sipping on this one, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to thoroughly enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them both ranked, starting with the North Coast Brewing's Barrel-Aged Old Rasputin 21, that's Roman numerals XXI, Rye Whiskey Barrel-Aged Russian Imperial Stout, 11.2% ABV out of Fort Bragg, California. The aroma on this one, very, very pungent, though not quite as pronounced as the highest top end. I had to dock 1 point, I gave it a 9. Taste on this, absolutely phenomenal. Just as with the standard Rasputin, this was absolutely fantastic, and it added another layer of depth and intricacy to it with that whiskey barrel. It gets a 10 out of 10. Body on this, again, just like the standard, massive, massive body. The ABV went up on this. It was an even bigger body still. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel. Mouthfeel on this, well above average. Quite viscous, though. For an 11.2%, I would indeed expect it to have a bit more viscosity, to stick around a little bit more than it did. It's kind of high mid of the road, not quite the top end. It gets a 9. Finish on this one. Very, very, very long finish. You could fully, completely taste every bit of that booze edge, that whiskey barrel edge, the wood that the barrel imparted, the malts. I mean, it was all in there, and it just kept going and going and going. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Head retention on this one. This was a lush, tight, creamy, foamy head. It could have been poured off of a nitro tap at a bar. Perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance, textbook, pitch black, black as night. Perfect 10 out of 10. Balance on this one. The balance on this was exceptional. Though really for my money, the barrel and the boozy edge overshadowed the malts just a little more than I would have liked. I appreciate that it was a very barrel forward, but I didn't want it to drown out that classic Russian Imperial Malt Stout back, and it did just a bit more than I would have liked. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I absolutely loved this beer. This is a top-notch, A+, world-class beer. It is well worth seeking. 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, even though I nitpicked just a couple of categories for a barrel-aged Russian Imperial Stout, it really doesn't get much better than this. I would recommend this to anybody that's a fan of the style. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. That brings the total score to a 97 out of 100. I only docked 3 total points, and that was really nitpicking. This is a world-class beer. Absolutely worth seeking. I recommend this to anybody who's a fan of Imperial Stouts, Barrel-Aged Imperial Stouts, Russian Imperial Stouts, Barrel-Aged Russian Imperial Stouts, the whole kit and caboodle. If you're a fan, seek this one out. You will not be disappointed. Moving on to beer number 2. This is the Fathers Brewing Wheelhouse 2018, a coffee Imperial Stout that's been whiskey barrel aged, 10% ABV out of Valparaiso, Indiana. This was aged for 4 months in Journeyman Not a King barrels, which is the base that inspired George Washington's personal rye whiskey recipe. A very special beer indeed. Aroma on this one. This was certainly above average, but it wasn't anywhere near the level of the Rasputin, and certainly not near the top tier end of aromas on Imperial Stouts. It gets a 7 out of 10. Taste, absolute home run. You could taste every bit of the whiskey barrel. You could taste every bit of the coffee and every bit of the base malts that went into this beer in beautiful harmony. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Body. Body on this one, I was surprised that it only came out to be medium, as this is a 10% Imperial Stout. I was shocked. It was just in the average range for the style. I had to give it a 5 out of 10. Mouthfeel. This beer had a nice viscosity and it was super duper creamy. It was just creamy and viscous, and that really went into adding the depth across multiple categories. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Finish on this one. This was a very, very, very long finish. It wasn't on the top tier end of barrel-aged Imperials, but it was certainly far above your average beer in this category. It gets a 9 out of 10. Head retention, just like the North Coast Old Rasputin, it was just textbook, lush, thick, creamy head. Could have come off of a nitro tap. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance-wise, again, just like the North Coast, it was as black as the night. You could not see through it. Perfect 10 out of 10. Balance on this one. This was an exceptionally well-balanced beer, and you got an idea when I explained the taste. You could get the barrel, you could get the wood of the barrel, you could get the coffee, and you could get the malt without any of them drowning out the other. That is a masterclass in how to balance a beer. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I absolutely loved this beer. I did. And I really only nitpicked a couple of categories, but those categories have a bearing on others. Scores always balance and shuffle each other out. And for me, it needed a bigger body for the ABV and a little more pronounced aroma, but I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9. Finally, as an example of the style, it gets the same score. It gets a 9 for the same reason. It needed a little more body and a little more aroma to kick it up to that perfect 10. As it were, a 9 is a great score. That brings the total score on the Fathers Brewing 2018 release of the Wheelhouse to an 89 out of 100. So only 8-point disparity between the two beers, both absolutely top-notch, world-class examples of what an Imperial barrel-aged beer can and should be. I highly recommend both of these beers to anybody that's a fan of the style. You cannot go wrong with either of them. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. As always, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Subscribe will keep the videos in your feed so you won't lose us. Like helps the channel. It helps others find us. And comments are really, really big. I want to hear from you. I want to know your thoughts. Let me know any questions you have, any opinions you have, anything you like, dislike, things you'd like to see, things you wish I wouldn't continue to do. Let me know in the comments. I want to hear from you. If you want to know exactly when our videos go live to YouTube, just click the notification bell. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, folks, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.